there's some stuff before we get started, there is some things I want to go over with you. Okay. First, the Unit 4 assessment, that letter from the Birmingham jail, I almost said Barberton. Ashley. Those are starting to trickle in, but slowly. Okay, check your grade. If your grade drops significantly, it's because you didn't turn in these two things, these 200-point assignments. Some of you are still working on it. That's okay. If you're still working on it, I don't take off for late work. So as long as you get it turned in. And keep in mind, guys, with this Unit 4 assessment, I'm grading it pretty straightforward. Okay. Feel like since we went over it, we spent 2 days in class working on it. We've been analyzing primary sources for a good chunk of the year. This is the hard-nosed one for me. Okay. So if you need help, just reach out. Okay. If you need an assignment list, please send me a Canvas link. Or a Canvas message, so I can make one for you. We got 3 weeks. 3 weeks left. Okay. That being said, so if some of you are astute observers, you'll see that I published the modules for the rest of the year. Okay, so everything that we're going to do, all the workbook, it's just workbooks for the rest of the year. Everything's here. So the next 2 weeks for the workbooks. And then the last week, if you look, the last week's just going to be hanging out and working on makeup. You know, if you need makeup work, getting caught up, that kind of stuff. That fair to everybody? Does that seem like it's doable? If some of us are behind, we can alter this schedule if we need to. But you know what I mean? I'll put out a poll. This schedule doable? Go ahead and take a minute and answer that poll for me. And keep in mind, those of you who are saying, yeah, no problem, keep in mind, as it's currently constructed, my Canvas is loading. $110 of us are not passing. Okay, 110 of us are currently not passing. So when you answer, yeah, this is totally doable, keep that in mind. My goal is to get that 110 number down to 0. Who abstained? Thing, what are you saying? Oh, no, you're fine. That being said, there's your Pear Deck link. But you guys now have access to everything. Okay? You have access to the entire semester. So again, if you're behind, please reach out. There is no penalty for late work. Okay? No penalty. You can get full credit on something from January if you haven't turned it in. If you need help, you need to let me know. Which 2 assignments, Jordan? These 2, the MLK quote and the letter from Birmingham jail. This was the Unit 4 test, the assessment. This is a test grade here. These 2. Okay. If you go to modules here, let it load. We worked on it last week. So week 15, we worked on it Thursday and Friday. So if you need to go back and go over those 2 class sessions where we worked on this together, do that. Especially because, we got more than half the answers to this test together, right? You guys remember that? There's a number, I can't tell you how many of these I had to reject or give kids like 20% on because they didn't do half of it. We did this together. And that to me is incredibly frustrating. So again, there's the Pear Deck link. We're going to pivot. No worries, Jordan. And we're going to talk about Jimmy Carter and his foreign policy. Yesterday we talked about Watergate. We're going to finish up the 1970s today. All right, this should go fairly quickly, even though it's a full thing. Good morning, Spencer. Where's your stress level? When I woke up today, I think I was here just because I felt like I had so much to do. But now, whenever I'm with you guys.
What's up, bro? What's up?
What's up, Kiyoshi?
What's up, bro?
I need you to not be disruptive, all right? Or I'm going to have to boot you. Where's that stress level for y'all? Appreciate it. And some of us are all over, and I get it, guys. It's the end of the year, and if we're kind of Daniel, I hear you, man. I hear you. Just remember, when something hurts that bad, that there was something in your life that made you feel that good that it hurts that bad. And it's easy to say it when it's not happening to you, Let me know if you need anything, all right, man? All right, let's get rolling here.
That was my brother.
All right, so our learning target today is we're going to look at some of the foreign... Kiyoshi, man, last chance. You're going to have to stop disrupting or I'm going to have to boot you. Today we're going to look at the foreign and domestic policy goals of Jimmy Carter's administration by discussing conflicts in the Middle East, the energy crisis that started with Nixon, and the 3 Mile Island incident. Well, Kiyoshi, even if it's not you, man, you got to get it under control, all right? It's happening on your end. All right, so quick recap. For decades, U.S. presidents had attempted to broker peace talks in the Middle East. And so this is a region that has constantly been in turmoil. And after World War II, England, France, and the United States and the Allies, they basically went in and carved out land to make Israel, right? And it's important to know that there was already people there. The Palestinians were living there, and they go in there and they take this land and establish a state of Israel. And that makes a lot.
Yeah, potato.
And that's going to make a lot of the Arab world angry. Okay, and they are going to have very little success brokering peace talks between countries in the Middle East. And it's not until Jimmy Carter brings together the leaders of Egypt and Israel that a landmark peace agreement is going to be reached. So let's talk a little bit, though. Let's go back. Remember, we talked about Nixon resigned after Watergate. Then his Vice President Gerald Ford takes over. Here's a fun fact, okay? It's a Jeopardy question. If you ever find yourselves on Jeopardy, who's the only president to serve as Vice President and never be elected to either office? It's Gerald Ford. Okay? Gerald Ford serves as vice president, then as president, and he's never elected to either one. Okay, and how is this happening? Remember, we talked about Spiro Agnew. He resigns because of those bribery allegations. Nixon appoints Ford as vice president. Then Nixon resigns. And then, so right of succession, according to the Constitution, the vice president becomes president. Ford becomes president. And he's never elected to the presidency. So a lot of people kind of just see him as illegitimate, and his presidency, it's only going to last 3 years. He's going to serve out the rest of Nixon's second term, and he's going to run for re-election, and he's going to lose to Jimmy Carter. And a lot of people become very unhappy with Gerald Ford because during his presidency, he pardons Nixon for his involvement in the Watergate scandal. So he makes it so Nixon can't get prosecuted or thrown in prison, even though it comes out that he's involved in everything. And a lot of people get upset about it. So Jimmy Carter becomes president, and in November of 1977, the Egyptian president Anwar Sadat expresses interest in engaging peace negotiations with Israel. Okay, so remember, there's a lot of turmoil, and Israel agrees to this meeting, and they start talking to each other, where before they were just straight up fighting wars with each other. President Sadat and Prime Minister Menachem start talking in Israel, and even though these talks are peaceful and cordial, they can't come to an agreement, and other Middle East countries don't want these talks to take place. And they try to pressure the president of Egypt to cease diplomatic relations with Israel. And countries like Syria, Iraq, Libya, Algeria, and parts of Yemen, they just stopped talking to Egypt. And then in December, Egypt hosts Israel, the United States, and the UN to a peace summit in Cairo, Egypt. 9 months later, the president of Egypt and the prime minister of Israel come to the United States to Camp David, the presidential retreat, for 2 weeks, and they start having peace talks there. And President Carter serves as the intermediary, right? He's going to be the middle ground. He's going to be the guy that kind of facilitates these peace talks and goes to bat for the other team when they have disagreement, right? Egypt disagrees with Israel. Carter's going to go to bat for Israel. Israel disagrees with Egypt. Carter goes to bat for Egypt, right? He's going to be the middleman. He's going to be like the middle child in a family dispute. For all your middle children out there. The leaders of both of these nations, they agree to terms, they return home, and their governments approve the agreement. And this agreement is known as the Camp David Accords. The agreement is known as the Camp David Accords, and it helps conclude many years of conflict between these two countries. This is going to be a turning point in Arab-Israeli relations, right? So from the onset of Israel becoming a country until then, nobody in the Middle East liked Israel whatsoever, and it's still like that. There's a lot of countries that have issues with Israel, particularly Iran. Egypt becomes the first Arab state to recognize Israel as a legitimate country. Remember, they carve out Israel and they take this land from the Palestinians. And the Arab world, they don't like that. Some members of the Arab world are completely outraged by this peace treaty. And this group, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, joins with Russia to issue a statement calling for the opposition of the Israeli-Egyptian agreement. Right? Successful talks continue between Egypt and Israel throughout the decade, as well as Israel and neighboring Jordan, who they were also fighting with. But settlements have yet to be reached in the core conflicts, which is the dispute between Israel and Palestinians. And they're still fighting. And, they are attacking one another right now. There are massive accusations against Israel for human rights violations against Palestinians. Israel is claiming the Palestinians are conducting suicide bombings and terrorist attacks against civilian targets. It's ugly. It's an ugly, ugly mess right now. 3 years after the Camp David Accords, Muslim extremists, angered by Sadat's policy to reconcile with Israel, staged a public assassination of Sadat while he was observing a military parade. So he's going to get killed for this. Then in the 70s, we're going to have the Iran hostage crisis. Basically, the CIA is going to go in and assist with the overthrow of the democratically elected prime minister of Iran because they didn't like his policies. And they're going to install Mohammad Reza Pahlavi as Iran's new leader or Shah. And he's going to be all right. He's going to usher in a time of prosperity and growth for Israel. But there's going to be some political opposition in the 70s, and it's going to build up and build up and build up, and the Shah is going to end up fleeing to Egypt, fearing for his life in 1979. Meanwhile, a Muslim cleric, I'm going to do my best, Ruhollah Khomeini, is going to take over Iran as the new Shah, and he had actually been exiled, but he's going to come in, and he's going to kind of change Iran and make it like this theocratic government that it is now, this hardcore fundamentalist Muslim country, and change everything. And President Carter is very unsure what to do because Iran's under new leadership. Relations between the two countries were already breaking down. And his team's telling Carter to fight back against the revolutionaries and reclaim Iran for the newly exiled leader, the newly exiled Shah, but the State Department's telling him to use diplomatic methods, and Carter ends up doing neither, which is going to make things worse. Meanwhile, that Shah that gets kicked out comes to the United States to get cancer treatment. He's sick. And this is going to anger these Iranian revolutionaries who are going to raid the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and take 66 Americans hostage. They're going to demand that the Shah be brought back to Iran for trial and basically to execute him. And they be given back the billions of dollars they believed he stole before he fled the country. Carter calls for an embargo of Iranian oil. They put sanctions on Iran, but doesn't matter. They're not going to give up these 66 hostages. And they're going to stay basically in this hostage situation until the 1980s, until 1980 in April. In April of 1980, they're going to authorize a secret rescue mission called Operation Eagle Claw, but it's going to fail. It's going to be aborted when 3 helicopters malfunctioned because of dust storms, and another one's going to crash into a plane. It's going to kill 8 U.S. soldiers, and the hostages are still going to be imprisoned. And Americans viewed Carter's management of the Iran hostage crisis as a massive failure. And this is going to lead to the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980. This is going to be basically like the big turning point as to why Carter does not get reelected. And minutes after, and to kind of rub salt in the wound, minutes after Reagan is inaugurated, the hostages get released. Reagan had been secretly negotiating with the Iranians during the election, and it was basically contingent upon his election. They'll release these hostages. And Reagan, kind of as a good faith towards Carter, knew, like, Carter took this very personally, that, you know, he wanted to get these people saved and back to safety. So Reagan sent Carter to Germany on his behalf to meet and pick up the freed hostages. Okay, we're going to skip through this one. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to try to get through this here. In the late 70s as well, under Carter, we're going to see a Soviet war in Afghanistan. And it's going to start way back in the 1950s when the U.S. and Russia start to establish presence in the Middle East, basically, you know, to secure trade and to secure oil. The United States is going to sign a defense treaty with Pakistan in 1954, while the Soviet Union will obtain vital positioning in Afghanistan. Additionally, the Afghan Communist Party is going to emerge as a strong force in Afghanistan, and Russia wants to support that, right? Just like the United States is going to support everybody opposing communism, Russia's going to support everybody that wants communism. And we're going to see some power changes in Afghanistan. Basically, at this time, Afghanistan's run by a bunch of regional warlords. And the hope was to collectivize and organize all of these radical factions to form one unified nation under the Afghan Communist Party, which is officially going to be named the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan. Okay, so Russia's going to come in to help. And the Carter administration is immediately going to recognize the opposition government. Russia's going to go in and enforce reforms through violent means, and this is going to make many of these Afghan tribes very angry because if you know anything about Afghanistan, it's a very rural country. It's surrounded by mountains. It's called the place where empires go to die. No invading force has ever successfully captured Afghanistan, from the United States all the way down back to Alexander the Great. And this unjust treatment of these tribes is going to lead to the rise of these Afghan freedom fighters, or the Mujahideen. And this group is going to receive U.S. support. Russia is going to put in a puppet government ruler, but it's not going to matter. The United States is going to continue assisting these freedom fighters. And if you know anything about recent U.S. history, what do you think these freedom fighters are going to turn into? Then in 1980, we're going to have the Olympics. And it's going to be held in Moscow in Russia. And Russia's invasion of Afghanistan is going to basically lead the United States and a bunch of other countries to consider a way to protest the actions of Russia. So they're going to boycott the 1980s Summer Olympics. And everybody's like, yeah, Russia sucks. We're not sending our athletes to Russia. So Russia's going to do the same thing to us in the 84 Olympics in Los Angeles. And then in the 80s, Russia and the Soviet forces are not going to be able to gain control over the Mujahideen. And they're going to be stuck in Afghanistan for 10 years. 10 years of occupation and war. Millions of lives lost. Billions of dollars spent. Does this sound familiar? It should. Russia will finally pull out of Afghanistan. Many people at the time will compare Russia's war in Afghanistan to America's conflict in Vietnam, or our eventual conflict in Afghanistan. However, this civil war is going to continue in Afghanistan between the Mujahideen and the Afghan communists, right? So here's where it gets really interesting, guys. And we'll talk about more of this next week, but here's where it gets really interesting. The CIA comes in and aids the Mujahideen in their struggle by sending supplies to training camps. Eventually, a Mujahideen group called the Taliban, who the CIA supported, wins that civil war. They will go on to take control of Afghanistan and establish an extreme Islamic state. The Taliban would then give safe harbor to an Arab named Osama bin Laden and his terrorist network Al-Qaeda, who also were a part of this Mujahideen freedom fighters fighting against the communists in Afghanistan. Then Al-Qaeda would attack the United States on September 11th and draw the United States into their longest war in history in Afghanistan. Oh, the gift's not playing? It's supposed to be a gift of the V for Vendetta where he knocks down the dominoes. But what are your thoughts on that? Remember, history is just a bunch of dominoes. And in that Truman Doctrine, we're going to help communism or help fight against communism wherever it is. Eventually, it's going to come back and really bite us. I mean, you could say it bit us in Vietnam. You could say it bit us in Korea. But the actions of that, the United States upholding the Truman Doctrine in the late 70s and early 80s is going to come back directly when it comes to the terrorist attacks on 9/11. Isn't history fun? All right, guys, it's 11. You have Workbook 5.5. And that's it. Don't forget target sessions at 12:30 and 2:30. If you need help, please Guys, if you need assignment lists, please reach out. I will make them for you. I will get them to you. We got 3 weeks left. Boom, boom, boom. Not even. We've got 4, 8. Get 11 more times to hang out. So, you guys have a great weekend. Stay safe. Relax. We'll see you.